the Emperor of Mankind, beloved by all, Horus Lupercal, the arch-traitor, Sanguinius, the angelic martyr, Malcador the Sigillite, Rogel Dawn, Rebute Gilliman, Lorgar, Perturabo, Erebus, Abaddon. These are names tied to the moments that changed everything. Some are names known in each and every hab unit, while others are more obscure, their actions lesser known, but no less impactful. These were some of the architects of the future. Their actions and their choices, born of ambition, resentment, hatred, or loyalty, have shaped the galaxy into what it is today, for better or for worse. But what of the forgotten names? What of the unheralded, the overlooked, the ignored? What of Erda, the mother of Primarchs, whose interference in the Primarch project disrupted the Emperor's dream before it had even truly begun? What of Amar Astarte, the Emperor's brightest geneticist, whose genius served to birth the first warriors of the Great Crusade? Or Arkan Land, the techno-archaeologist who unearthed wonders from the bones of old Night and who led development of some of the Imperium's most valued technologies and helped ensure the success of the Saturnine Gambit? And what of the man called Yugan Ter? It is this man, this forgotten name, this footnote in the history of the galaxy that I want to talk about today. Ter was a man with a proven track record, a respected Imperial commander who had once served with distinction under the banner of the 63rd Expeditionary Fleet during the Great Crusade. His service with the Lunar Wolves gave him a certain aura of glory by association alone, and his personal friendship with the yet-to-be-named Warmaster Horus Lupercal only cemented his reputation. He was a man of status and of standing, one of the few mortals who lived up to the standards of the 16th and who the Primarch could trust wholeheartedly. So in the compliance of the remote feral world of 63-8, more commonly known as Davin, had been brought to a swift and decisive end, it was Ter who would be appointed as its first Imperial planetary governor. Horus himself entrusted him with the role, with the mission to bring the light of Imperial truth to Davin's warrior tribes, to drag its primitive people out of the barbarism of their primitive ways and into the glorious future of the burgeoning Imperium, and to reshape the planet into a valuable contributor to the Emperor's dream. You might well imagine that Ter would have welcomed such an opportunity, as most seemingly would. The chance to build rather than destroy, to lead rather than conquer. You might think Ter would have appreciated the opportunity to add to his list of accomplishments the legacy of being one who transformed yet another useless rock into a shining beacon of Imperial civilization. But you would be wrong. There are in fact some that say that Ter viewed this assignment as exile or as dismissal. Some say he saw it as a sign that he was no longer needed or worthy to serve on the Great Crusade, that his worth as a military commander had faded away in the eyes of Horus and the Lunar Wolves. Others say he felt betrayed, forgotten, cast aside in favour of younger, more ambitious officers. It's said that Ter wanted to refuse the assignment, to plead with his old friend Horus not to trap him on a backwater planet barely out of the Stone Age, but to allow him to serve out his days with honour and glory, bringing the light of illumination to humanity's long-lost children. But his martial pride simply wouldn't allow it, nor would his respect for Horus and his authority. So Ter swallowed his annoyance, accepted the appointment with a smile and a salute, and resigned himself to what he saw as a slow, dishonourable decline. In his darker moments, it's said that Ter would think of the role as little more than that of a glorified nanny, a resource-poor governor overseeing a world of beasts, mutants, and cavemen, tasked with managing a preschool for savages and bumpkins. As Horus and the 63rd Expeditionary Fleet pushed onward to fresh glories, Ter, with the resources at his disposal, a modest force of troops, settlers, iterators, remembrances, architects, and a handful of word-bearers detached from the fleet set about reshaping the nomadic tribes of hunters and warriors. These scattered peoples who worshipped the predatory beasts of their great grassy plains needed to be moulded into something more aligned with the Imperium's needs. Productive, obedient, loyal. And from what records remain, we can see that Temba was largely successful, at least initially. But this progress was interrupted when word reached Temba of resistance, not on Davin itself, but on its lone grassy moon. The inhabitants of Davin's moon, as it turned out, had not only rejected imperial truth, but were in fact openly defiant. Deciding to confront this roiling uprising personally, Temba mustered his forces aboard his flagship, the Glory of Terror, and launched an expedition to quell whatever movement had established itself on the moon. Perhaps also seeking, if only for a moment, to reclaim the sense of purpose and glory he had known as part of the 63rd Expeditionary Fleet only months before. Yet, seeing no easy path to victory after his arrival, Temba sought to give the locals one last chance for a diplomatic solution. He proposed a parley, a chance to meet the uprisers in peace, to negotiate terms, and to take steps toward achieving a peaceful outcome that could not serve to sully the reputation of his planetary governorship. But Temba underestimated the locals. The moon's inhabitants had no interest in peace or negotiation. When the meeting began, they are said to have unleashed sorcery and dark powers of a kind far beyond mortal comprehension. Temba and his men were overwhelmed, assaulted by forces they could neither fight nor understand. For Temba and his men, death would have been a mercy, for as fate would have it, the inhabitants of Davin's moon were not just dissenters and uprisers, they were servants of a deity called Nergleth. We know this entity by another name, Nurgle, the Lord of Decay, and in Nurgle's service, no death is ever final. Those who fell that day were not granted the peace of oblivion. Instead, they and those who would convert to service with Nurgle were cursed with eternal existence as decaying plague-ridden husks, shambling abominations of endless rot. But for Temba, Nurgle reserved a different fate. The despair, bitterness, and quiet resentment festering deep beneath his mask of martial honor and dedication were cracks in the armor of his soul, and this made him an ideal vessel, ripe with the qualities that the Lord of Decay considered boons rather than flaws. To Nurgle, such emotions were fertile soil for his blessings, and Temba was the perfect garden in which will bloom something far greater. And so Temba was spared the fate of the others. Instead, Nurgle revealed the mysteries of the warp to him, peeling back the limitations of mortal understanding to reveal the great truths beyond. He showed Temba limitless power. He showed him his potential, and he knew what must be done. Temba did not resist further. He gave himself willingly, his soul a willing seedbed for Nurgle's gifts. In that act of deliberate surrender, the man he once was ceased to exist, and something far more terrible was born. 60 standard years passed without word or news from the Davin system reaching the wider Imperium. In that time, the Great Crusade fought on. The Imperium swelled with countless victories, and many new human civilizations were brought into the fold, spearheaded by the 16th Legion, now well and truly the pride of the Crusade. It was after the triumph at Alinor that an unexpected message arrived. First Chaplain Erebus of the Wordbearers had contacted the 63rd Expeditionary Fleet, requesting Horus, the newly appointed War Master, to personally assist with a dire unfolding situation in the Davin system. And so the 63rd Expeditionary Fleet set its course back to the Davin system, to the world they had made compliant so many decades earlier. Upon their return and rendezvous with the word-bearer stationed there, First Chaplain Erebus informed Horus that Yugan Ter had turned traitor. Ter, Erebus claimed, had led a rebellion against the Emperor and now ruled and planned his rebellion from Davin's moon. Disbelief, betrayal, and simmering rage boiled in the War Master's heart. The news struck deep. Ter had been a loyal friend, someone Horus had believed in and valued. That such a man could betray the Emperor, the Imperium, and Horus himself tore at the War Master in a way very few could have understood. It was one thing for some ignorant savages living in a lightless cave to reject the light of the Imperium, for they know nothing better, but for a man like Ter, a trusted, decorated officer who had sworn oaths of loyalty to the Imperium, who had fought for its ideals and shared in the dream of unity, for such a man to willingly turn his back on all of it, that was a deeper treachery, a disgusting betrayal, something that demanded a personal and ruthless response. So Horus led the assault personally, commanding some 5 battle companies of his newly renamed Sons of Horus, with Erebus at his side, bolstered by Legio Mortis and other mortal auxiliaries. Together, this was a display of overwhelming power meant to crush this foul betrayal and serve as a stern warning to any who might dare turn their backs on the Emperor and the Imperium. Yet when they arrived on Davin's moon, the once familiar landscape of sprawling grasslands and sunlit savannas that mirrored the world of Davin itself had been transformed into a reeking, toxic swamp shrouded in a thick, endless fog. As the assault commenced, Horus and his forces prepared to face disciplined resistance orchestrated by a proven and determined commander, instead confronted the same horrific abominations birthed during Ter's disastrous parley decades earlier. Rising from the muck were the bloated undead remains of Ter's once loyal force, twisted beyond all recognition. The battle raged as the Sons of Horus pushed deep into the corrupted heart of the swamp, their bolters barking and their blades slicing through the shambling plague-ridden horde, for at the centre of it all lay the rusting hulk of the Glory of Terror, Ter's once proud flagship, now a decaying ruin half sunk into the filth. Horus himself led the charge towards the ship's bridge, certain that Ter would be there coordinating this nightmare, carving a path through the undead as he did so. But as the fighting intensified, the Glory of Terror began to crumble, succumbing to the twin forces of its own advanced decay and the earth-shaking ferocity of the battle raging both within and without. The ship's superstructure soon gave way, collapsing under its own weight. Enormous chunks of bulkhead, plasteel paneling, and twisted debris came crashing down, severing Horus from the main assault force and leaving him effectively alone. With his Vox destroyed, his armor compromised, and a jagged spike of wreckage speared clean through his chest, Horus still pressed on. He soon reached the bridge, and there he found his old friend. The once respected officer, Yugan Ter, now stood over the lifeless body of the Or, Captain Vrulum Moy, one of Horus's own Legion captains. But his old friend had changed, not just apparently in loyalty, but clearly in his physical form. Where once was the loyal and upright follower, now was only a filthy, monstrous traitor who deserved the most painful of deaths. Bulging masses of plump green-grey flesh jiggled and nestled swarms of insects. The tatters of an imperial uniform clung wetly to the bloated form, doing little to hide the enormous ruptured belly that protruded. In one filth-ridden, swollen hand, a strange exotic sword was held tightly, its edge still wet with the lifeblood of Captain Moy. After a brief exchange, Ter attempted to sway Horus to his side. He spoke of freedom, of Horus's own ambition, of truths beyond the Emperor, and of the eternal beings that dwelled in the warp. In response, Horus drove his golden sword forward, impaling Ter through the heart. The blow would have slain a mortal, or even an Astartes, outright. But Ter just laughed it off, wrenching himself free of Horus's blade before raising his own to his lips to whisper the War Master's name. Then, with speed and intensity that was simply not possible for such a monster, Temba lunged at Horus. Horus parried, he dodged and he countered as he was driven back by a flurry of lightning-fast masterstrokes. His own blade moved in flawless shimmering arcs in response, slicing, cutting, thrusting and deflecting with skill born of decades of war. But it was all for nothing. Temba was seemingly immune to Horus's every blow. Where Horus's golden blade should have cleaved and cauterized, it left only shallow gashes that oozed rotting filth. Evisceration, exsanguination, obliteration, none of it mattered. Nothing would slow the monstrous thing that had once been Yugan Temba. Somehow this mockery of Yugan Temba, who was never the swordsman, was outclassing him. The War Master, Horus Lupercal, the favoured son of the Emperor of Mankind, was being outclassed by this thing. So it was but a matter of time before Temba found a gap in Horus's defences. His strange blade cutting away the War Master's shoulder guard before a second strike drove the blade deep into his flesh there. Searing pain shot through Horus's body and he cried out in pain. But in that same moment, Horus swept his own blade to sever Temba's sword arm in a spray of black blood and pus. The bloated, severed limb clattered to the deck, still clutching its weapon, and with Temba's loss of the blade came the exorcism of what little remained of Temba's mind. As clarity returned to Temba in his final moments, he offered a deep, broken apology to Horus, recounting the horrors the dark gods had shown him. The galaxy as a wasteland, the Emperor dead, and mankind in bondage to a nightmarish hell of bureaucracy and superstition. With his final breath, Temba begged Horus to save humanity from such a fate and told him that he was the only one who could. But the damage was already done. For the weapon Temba had wielded was none other than the Anathame, an ancient sentient Xenos weapon of the Kinnebrak. Once the blade's wielder uttered a name against it, the Anathame would form an intimate, almost preternatural connection with the named victim. This connection enabled the weapon to bypass all defenses, martial, physical, biological, psychic or otherwise, delivering mortal wounds with ease regardless of the wielder's skill or that of their victim. So the wound Horus suffered was by no means ordinary. It was something that could overcome the genetic mastery of his Primarch physiology, a wound that would ignore the biological defenses engineered into him by his father. The damage inflicted by such a weapon was impervious to almost all natural or conventional means of healing. Neither the expertise of the Legion Apothecaries, who had but a child's understanding of Primarch anatomy, nor the combined knowledge of Horus's closest sons could reverse its effects. Perhaps nothing truly could, save for the intervention of the Emperor himself, or maybe that of Magnus or the Sigillite, and they were all so very far from Davin. It was a wound that festered in ways that could not be understood, cutting deep into body, mind, and soul, and unraveling the three. It was something that would force any man's sons into desperate action. Therefore, seeking an apparent cure offered by Erebus, Horus's most loyal captains turned to the Davinite priests, whose esoteric knowledge offered a glimmer of hope. They carried their fallen lord to the Temple of the Serpent Lodge, a place steeped in ancient rites and worryingly octagonal in shape. Over 9 days within the Serpent Lodge under the care of the Davinite priests, and suffering the manipulation of Erebus and the powers of chaos, Horus was not just physically healed, but also forever changed. When Horus finally left the Serpent Lodge, he was different, disillusioned, alienated, and, as some would dare to say, corrupted. But this series of events was by no means random. It was, in fact, the culmination of a meticulously orchestrated scheme by Erebus and the Word-Bearers, for Erebus had sown the seeds of this tragedy long before Temba pierced the War Master's flesh, stealing the anatheme blade from the Interex's Hall of Devices and weaponizing the relationship built between Temba and the War Master. Erebus may have placed the anatheme in Temba's hand, but it was still Temba, unwitting pawn though he was, that wounded Horus with the anatheme and set in motion the events that followed. I believe the emotional betrayal, Horus being struck down by a man he had once called brother, compounded by that same man's dying words of warning, cut deep into the War Master's psyche. And when we combine this with Horus's own festering doubts following the Interex campaign, and his own innate driving ambition, we can see that even before the Davenite priests began their rituals, before Erebus spent over a week whispering half-truths and visions to nurture those seeds, the cracks in Horus's loyalty had already begun to form. But it was still this moment, this one man, this instrument used and abused by Erebus that in many ways sparked the Horus heresy and set in motion the millennia of war and horror that would follow. Put simply, the wound in the War Master's shoulder, inflicted by his old friend, was the gateway through which the Dark Gods could corrupt and claim their prize. But I do still find myself asking a few questions. If it had not been Temba wielding the anatheme, would Erebus have found another instrument equally effective to fulfill his plan? Or was Temba the only one capable of delivering such a personal, intimate betrayal that would so deeply wound Horus and warrant his own rash personal involvement? And did Temba truly, willingly turn to chaos and embrace Nurgle following the disastrous parlay as he admitted in his final moments? Or was that yet another misguidance fed to him by Erebus, designed to further highlight Temba's weakness, reinforce the awe-inspiring power of the warp, and obscure the true extent of the Wordbearer's involvement? I don't know. But regardless of the answers to these questions, we do know one thing at least is true. Yugan Ter had a profound and lasting impact on the galaxy. His relationship with Horus, the feelings of bitterness, resentment, and betrayal he locked away, his decisions, his body, and the mortal wound he delivered through the anatheme, this became the spark that ignited the greatest civil war humanity will ever know. Anyway, thanks for watching. Dystopian Chimp, out.